On today's show, we are breaking down the Calder Trophy race in the National Hockey League, led by Lane Hutson, who's been breaking records and threatening a whole bunch more. All that and a lot more coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. My name is Sebastian High, and I'm your host here on the podcast, and I'm also the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we are diving in, not into draft-eligible talents, but into the Calder Trophy race in the National Hockey League. And we are going to be talking a whole bunch about Lane Hutson on today's show. How about that overtime comeback victory against the Florida Panthers to sweep the season series 4-0 and just beating the Florida Panthers on a home and away in the last 3 days. And Lane Hutson scored 6 assists in those two performances. In the second segment, we'll be keeping things going, talking about the overall Calder race, the other big candidates in here, Macklin Celebrini, Dustin Wolf, and Matvei Michkov. And finally, we're going to be wrapping up the show by talking about some underrated rookies in this year's season, players that aren't necessarily in that Calder race, but have been productive players, scoring a lot of points for their teams and just being worthy of shout outs for their performances here this season. But before we dive into Lane Hutson and the Habs here in the first segment, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, Lane Hutson, Habs fans, I'm sure that you are still very calm after that overtime victory against the Florida Panthers, playing a very strong game all through all three periods, but being down 2-1, having some unlucky bounces, but being saved by Samuel Montembeault on multiple occasions. And then with 30 seconds left, a defensive zone face-off, battle along the boards, but getting the puck free up the ice, Lane Hutson being the one to drive play up that left wing, entering into the offensive zone, hitting the brakes, letting his teammates catch back up and get to the net. Nick Suzuki does this, going all the way back behind the back post, hiding and creeping his way towards the low slot. And under heavy pressure from Seth Jones, Lane Hutson first loses the puck a bit because Seth Jones' poke check worked and pushed it all the way almost across the blue line, but not quite. It stuck in the offensive zone. And then in pure desperation, a blind shot from Lane Hutson into the general area of the net takes a deflection off of Sam Reinhart, who, as a forward and an offensive-minded one at that, in a deep defensive zone position, makes a fatal mistake and goes down to block the shot. It was a weak shot that Vanacek would have had no issue stopping, and he bobbles it off of his leg or his hand, and it just goes straight to Nick Suzuki at the back post, who just needs to switch to his backhand to put it into the back of the net. And in that game, Lane Hutson had an assist on all three goals the Habs scored, including then the overtime winner. The Panthers did not even touch the puck in overtime. The Habs had the entirety of possession. The game just completely switched at the tail end of that third with that final rush. It was only the Montreal Canadiens that really had possession of the puck from that moment until the game was over, and they ended up winning it. It was a truly fantastic comeback victory for the Habs, but Lane Hutson, even though Nick Suzuki got the big headlines for scoring both the tying and the winning goal in the span of 35 or 40 seconds of ice time, Lane Hutson has been the engine of this Montreal Canadiens offense, especially down this last stretch. His production has been, is there any word other than obscene at this stage? 9 assists in his last 5 games, 6 assists in his last 2 against the reigning Stanley Cup champions, might I add, who are also fighting to stay higher in the playoff race against the Toronto Maple Leafs, who I believe did just leap over them now with this loss to the Canadiens. This brings Lane Hutson to 62 points on the season, 57 assists. These are historic numbers and in every sense of the word. And as a history major myself, a Carleton alum, let's just dig into the history here and to the statistics because there are just some fun stuff to look at here with Lane Hutson. So we'll start with the production here, but afterwards we are going to move over to his defensive habits. So we are going to look a bit more on the scouting side of his on-ice play, and we're going to focus on the defensive play because I think it's been a really underrated aspect of his game this season, especially because of the plus-minus stat. And I think Eric Engels pointed out a very interesting point on X or Twitter earlier today, where he mentioned that Lane Hutson's been on the ice for like a bunch of empty net goals when he's been on the ice, of course, when the Habs are seeking that tying goal in desperation. And those count against. So does 3-on-3 and 4-on-4. And Hutson has surprisingly poor numbers in at least 4-on-4, I believe. And that really just completely massacres his plus minus. Whereas at 5-on-5, I believe he's like a +1 or a +2 this season on the Canadiens while playing a, of course, very offensive game. But to get back to the history and the statistics here, Lane Hutson is 3 assists shy of tying the all-time assist record for a rookie defenseman. That is held by Larry Murphy with 60. Hutson now, of course, with 57 is right there, just 3 behind. He's most likely going to surpass him and get that record. And among overall points, Lane Hutson is only 14 behind Larry Murphy, who holds that same record with 76. And yes, 14 points in 8 games, more than optimistic, but for a player with 9 points in his last 5, I don't think it's out of the question or impossible with just how well he's been playing and how big of a role he's been playing in that Habs offense, playing 25, 28 minutes a game. He's been triple shifted at times, just an incredibly important piece in this Canadian system. And I want to also note his production and the overall record-setting nature of it this season doesn't just hold up against defensemen. It does against all rookies, just forwards as well. Does not matter. Overall, in terms of top assist producers ever among rookies of any position, Lane Hutson at 57 is already in 10th all time. This includes your Sidney Crosbys and Timo Solani's and Mario Lemieux's. Lane Hutson has just equaled Mario Lemieux in terms of rookie assists totals, which is insane. And Sidney Crosby only has 6 more than Lane Hutson does at this point. Crosby had 63 assists in his rookie campaign. That is entirely within the reach here for Lane Hutson. And if he goes on an absolute heater and somehow gets 13 assists in the last 8 games, then yes, he will tie the all-time record as well for skater assists, which is held by both Peter Stastny and Joe Juneau. Even when going beyond just assists and expanding that to points as a whole, and as a reminder, Lane Hutson only has 5 goals this season to boost his points tally over his assists. He is only 10 points away from being one of the only 47, if he makes it, players to hit 72 points in their rookie season. That would be 10 in 8 games. That is entirely doable from where he's currently at. And that puts him on par with your Patrick Kanes in terms of rookie production and top 50 all time for any position for any rookie. That is something to write home about here with Lane Hutson. From a statistical perspective, this player has more than deserved the Calder Trophy this season. What he's been doing is, nearly unparalleled in the past 40 years, pretty much, as we are exploring here. But Let's focus a bit more on the actual defensive game because I think it's been an area of strength, especially here down the stretch for the Montreal Canadiens in a heavy playoff race, clinging on to that second wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. The Ottawa Senators are really putting distance between themselves and that second spot. They're really locking down that first wildcard spot as the Atlantic is pretty much locked up with those three teams, with Tampa and Toronto and Florida, of course, in those slots. And the Habs have far from guaranteed their spot in the NHL playoffs this season. With 79 points, they only have a 2-point cushion over the Columbus Blue Jackets and New York Rangers. And the Blue Jackets have a game in hand. So things are very tight in the Eastern Conference, but Lane Hutson's defensive game has been an incredibly important piece for the Habs to still hang on to that spot despite going on a 5-game losing streak here very recently before winning these 2 games against the Florida Panthers, which is quite the way to prove yourself and come back from a losing stretch against the reigning Stanley Cup champs. But Lane Hutson's defensive implications have been entirely supported by his intelligence. I think that his intelligence, but also the habits that underlie it, the scanning activity, the awareness, the wherewithal to know where both his teammates and his opponents are on the ice, allows Lane Hutson to pick up options and threats that are creeping in towards the slot that other defenders perhaps don't catch. With his active scanning habits and his anticipative qualities, he's able to leverage his vision, which is such a big asset, of course, in his playmaking game, to the defensive side as well. And I think his intelligence has just been such a supportive piece in his defensive game. But without his nonstop motor, nothing would be working defensively because with the small frame, sure, some decent leverage mechanics, he can hold his ground, but he's still quite light. And not being the best defensive skater in the world in terms of pivoting and four-way mobility, he's not quite your Quinn Hughes in that sense. Still, I think that his intensity has just kept him so tight on opponents. His gap management and gap control has been a real asset here for him this season. He covers a lot of ice with his really high stride rate, and as a rush defender has really, really impressed me this season. The growth that he's demonstrated in that asset of the game has been huge. He's far better at it in the NHL this season than he was in college hockey last campaign. He's been the Habs' most aggressive rush defender this season in terms of he's the defenseman that kills the most rushes, but he's also the defenseman who gets beat the most on the rush in terms of he takes risks, and that means that he kills some plays, and it means that his opponents can get around him and others by your big, burly defensive defensemen who like to lay your big hits, and the things that are really valued in the playoffs, killing plays off the rush. These are elements that get the biggest cheers from the crowd in postseason hockey. Lane Hutson does this defensively. He's not just an offensive machine. He's been playing better and better and better defensive hockey. And with a high-end mind that just continually learns and adapts and gets better this season, and an intensity that never ceases, I don't think that his defensive ceiling has been reached yet either. I think he's still growing in his defensive game, and that ceiling is just stratospheric, I think, with Lane Hutson. The potential is so, so high, and he's a player that, with all of these fantastic habits and intelligence, on top of just that game-breaking skill that gets fans out of their seats more than any other player on the Montreal Canadiens. I've sat in the Bell Center, and even Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki and Patrick Laine, doesn't matter who it is, Lane Hutson gets fans out of their seats and cheering with anticipation when the puck is on his stick twice as much as anybody else. It hasn't been close. He lights up the crowd, and he's been as effective in terms of what happens on the ice as he's been electric in what is felt in the crowd. Such a fun player, and in my opinion, in this playoff race, being the one Calder candidate who is in a playoff spot at the moment. Dustin Wolf and the Calgary Flames are not quite making it, I don't think, with just how well the St. Louis Blues have been doing recently there in the West. And Hutson has arguably been the Canadiens' most or second most important player down the stretch here, neck and neck with Nick Suzuki, the captain, who's just found another level in his game since the Four Nations face-off break, and I believe that Lane Hutson deserves the Calder Trophy here this year. But that is not to say that there are not other extraordinarily qualified candidates. We are spoiled for choice in terms of Calder potential this season. There are so many fantastic rookies, and we'll be digging into that in the next segment. And in the final one, of course, we will be giving shout outs to a bunch of players who've been playing really good hockey here in their rookie seasons. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All righty, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, kicking it off with my personal second, if I had a Calder ballot, Dustin Wolf of the Calgary Flames. How good has he been down the stretch here for the Flames? I've been perpetually impressed with what I've seen. He's a player I've loved to watch. Going back to his draft year campaign, I remember being really shocked that he fell all the way to the seventh round. For me, he was a clear top 50 talent in that class. In terms of overall numbers, I wasn't actually watching and scouting prospects yet. At that time, he was a 2019 draft selection, as a reminder, but he has just been fantastic here. A 909 save percentage in 45 games with the Calgary Flames, a team that was not expected to even compete for the playoffs this season, but they were in that race up until maybe a week or a week and a half ago. It has not been long since the Calgary Flames were very much in that fight in the Western Conference, and Dustin Wolf has been in a very, very important piece of that. But 2 3-game losing streaks here in the past couple of weeks have just been a killer blow, but it has not been as a fault of Dustin Wolf. They've played teams like the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Colorado Avalanche during this stretch, and they lost a key game in the shootout to another team they were competing with for that final wildcard spot, the Vancouver Canucks. So overall, I think Dustin Wolf, in terms of the statistical profile of dragging his team along this season all the way to the doorstep of the playoffs, and in a year where Calgary was starting a retool. They don't like to use the rebuild word, of course, but they did better than expected this season and got more out of players that they have been paying big money to be their stars, like Jonathan Huberdeau as well as Nazem Kadri. So Dustin Wolf has still been the star of that team, despite those resurging performances, despite Rasmus Andersson being a fantastic player on the blue line for this team. Dustin Wolf has been my MVP of the season for the Flames, and if he'd managed to get them all the way to the playoffs, I don't think that I'd be able to separate much between him and Lane Hutson. What Wolf has been doing this season with elite level composure and intelligence, and really just compensating massively for being just 6 feet and 174 pounds. This is an undersized goaltender, but with everything, the skill and the intelligence, the tracking ability, and just the headspace. He's just always in and dialed all game, every game. Doesn't matter. He doesn't get rattled easily whatsoever. Even in games where he lets in 2 or 3 quick successive goals, he gathers himself quickly and gets back focused on the game. He's a goaltender I have really, really admired this season, especially as a rookie. And he is a very underrated player, I think, in the NHL here at the moment, but that should not take much longer for him to get his due credit. Moving on to Macklin Celebrini, another more than Calder-worthy candidate here this season. Truly spoiled for choice, has 21 goals and 53 points in 61 games here with the San Jose Sharks, driving the offense for this team most nights that I've tuned in for the San Jose Sharks. He's already one of the three most efficient rush attackers in the entire NHL. He's just generating offensive entry after offensive entry after offensive entry with elite level skating and just high end intelligence in identifying gaps. And he has the deceptive qualities to make defenders go one way and to pull them in order to extend those gaps before exploding into them. His explosiveness and his 1-2 step acceleration is a true standout tool for this player. But that shooting ability off the rush, combined with elite level vision, he has it all in terms of offensive tools. I think that the sky's the limit with this player, and he's second in scoring, just 1 point behind William Eklund there with the San Jose Sharks at the moment. And I think that that connection alongside Will Smith and perhaps whoever the Sharks are picking this year, if they don't end up going defenseman, I think that the future is bright for the Sharks, and that Macklin Celebrini has been fantastic this campaign. I've loved watching him play. He's such a mature, refined talent that easily, I think, already a top 30 center in the NHL. That does not give me much hesitation whatsoever to say, because he controls the pace of shifts and games. He can change games on his own. And that take over shift ability is something that not all that many players in this league have, and Celebrini already does. And he is the youngest player in the NHL, and he's only turning 19 in August. This is insane. He's a truly special talent. But to wrap up this second segment, let's go over to the Philadelphia Flyers and Matvei Michkov, because he is dynamic and just so much fun to watch. I love watching him play because, again, the intelligence. This is the beauty of the Calder class this season. Throughout here, every single of the four big candidates in the Calder class, elite level intelligence, whether it's Dustin Wolf in net, Lane Hutson on defense, or Celebrini and Michkov at forward. These are players of every single one in a different position, and yet each one among the most intelligent in their position as a rookie from the past 5 years at least. And really standout trait for each of these players. And Michkov has been showing that off by proving very quickly that he's not a one-trick pony as a goal scorer like he was often painted in his draft year. He's a tremendous playmaker. His one-touch game, the physical habits, the leverage mechanics, being solid on his feet, these are all strong elements in his game. And even though he's been benched sometimes this season with John Tortorella, he is a true first-line player at this point. In his last 5 games, he has 10 points, 4 goals, 6 assists. He's all the way up to 24 goals and 58 points on the season in 74 games. This is a really special player, and I think that he's the level of talent that Philadelphia can build a franchise around, and he is going to be terrorizing the Metropolitan Division for years to come. Not a fun player to play against, especially in and around the net. He's, I think, incredibly underrated as a net front scorer, just because he is a bit smaller. But so much of his goal scoring comes in terms of his habits, his off puck movement, his routes, his anticipation, getting to the dangerous areas, and having the physicality to stick his spot in those areas as well. Rather than just pure shooting ability. But that shooting ability is a standout trait, of course. But there's so much more to this player. But that wraps things up here for the second segment. In the final one, we're going to wrap up the show by giving shout outs to 10 or so rookies who've produced a lot of points here this season, while playing some really effective hockey in about middle 6 minutes as forwards in the NHL here. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go to. And if you love to crack open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in shell variety is always a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Alrighty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, shouting out 12 rookie forwards who've been playing key roles for their teams up and down the lineup. We've already talked about the three top scoring rookies this season with Lane Hutson, Matvei Michkov, and Macklin Celebrini, but we're going to round out the top 15 here in the final segment. So let's kick things off here at number 4. Cutter Gauthier of the Anaheim Ducks is fourth in rookie scoring with 38 points. It's been neck and neck with Will Smith, his teammate from last season. They've had a little bit of a competition here in terms of rookie production, but Gauthier has that 1 point edge, but he's also played 8 more games than Will Smith. Gauthier has been excellent for the Anaheim Ducks, bringing a physical brand of hockey and leveraging his off-the-wall handling ability to open up some more playmaking opportunities than he was in college last season. He's not just been a scoring threat this campaign. He's really expanded on that playmaking game, which has been very promising for the Anaheim Ducks, and he's been very much looking like a future top 6 stalwart this season. Will Smith, for his part, has been getting better and better and better as the season's gone on. Definitely looked out of place when the season began. I think alongside many other scouts, had some question marks around how he would adjust to the NHL pace of play, especially. And it took him a couple of months to do so. And there were some ugly games in that stretch where he did not look like he really belonged at the NHL speed. But that has entirely shifted. His intelligence, the playmaking creativity are beginning to shine and take over certain shifts. And overall, he's just been really dynamic as of late for the San Jose Sharks. And with 13 goals and 37 points in 65 games, he's certainly had the production to back it up as a pretty lanky rookie here this season, and will be building up on that production for years to come. Sixth in rookie scoring is Logan Stankoven, now of the Carolina Hurricanes. One of my favorite players that I've scouted in the last 5 years. A intelligent and extremely intense spark plug winger. Never say die attitude and ability to score from in tight have made him just a really, really dangerous player offensively at every level he's played at so far. He's still around half a point a game production now in the NHL this season, but he's been doing that very consistently this campaign. Has 5 points in 10 games since the trade to the Hurricanes, and is now at 11 goals and 34 points through 69 games this season. At 7 in rookie scoring, we've got Zachary Bolduc of the St. Louis Blues, who in 65 games this season has 16 goals, 15 assists, and 31 points. The tools have always been a strong element of Bolduc's game. Really hard shot, accurate release, good handling skill to open up lanes for that shooting ability, and a decent array of playmaking tools as well. I've seen him execute some really nice hook passes around players off the rush this season in the NHL, and he's been adjusting to the NHL pace a lot better than I thought he would this season. He's a player that I think I had some doubts about in his draft year, especially in terms of that pace, but it was also the COVID year, and he played less than 30 games in the QMJHL, so can't really blame scouts too much in terms of that draft year. But the St. Louis Blues at 17th overall got a really, really solid player who's been playing excellent minutes there in the middle six and maybe due for a top 6 promotion next season. But he's been a real standout there with the Blues. At number 8 in rookie scoring from the New York Islanders, Maxim Tsiplikov with 8 goals and 23 assists and 31 points. The very physical and intense winger has been a real nuisance this season to play against. He's a pain to play against. Players that face him leave games with a lot of bruises across their bodies because he never stops working. And I've really enjoyed his engagement here this season, and he's gotten involved offensively as a result of that from the middle six. He's not playing the biggest minutes, but getting on the score sheet because he's just constantly working hard and getting to the dangerous areas. And overall, he's a player who's playmaking, I think, has also certainly been elevated by that physicality mentality, by that intensity, and certainly something to build off now moving forward with the New York Islanders. But at number 9 and 10 in rookie scoring are two players I want to put in one here because they're both ones I've loved watching for a very long time, and that's Marco Kasper of the Detroit Red Wings and Jackson Blake of the Carolina Hurricanes. Two players with high-end motors. Kasper has 15 goals and 30 points this season in 68 games. He's been playing a lot in the top six alongside guys like Dylan Larkin during extended stretches, and his intensity and his ability to score from in tight and get the puck to the middle of the ice has been a constant danger there for the Red Wings. And Jackson Blake, for his part, is a bit more of a deft playmaker, but perhaps a bit more soft skill than Kasper has, but a bit less violence, certainly. He's a much smaller player. But at number 11, a player I just watched because I watched the Florida versus Montreal game, Matvei Michkov, and he really, really impressed me in this performance. In 64 games this season, he's had 13 goals and 27 points, being promoted to the top power play unit recently, getting chances inside the top six, playing more and more now past the trade deadline on a team that is headed for a hopefully long playoff run. And this has been excellent to see for a player like Samoskevich, who I've always loved to watch because of his high-end intelligence. He always just impressed me a bit more than Matthew Coronado in his draft year campaign with the Chicago Steel, because that intelligence and creativity and dynamic handling skill opens up so many opportunities. And he was always such a lanky little player with growing room and growth potential that I was very excited about what he could flourish into. And this season, he has not disappointed me one bit. This has been more than what I could have hoped for a rookie campaign on a team as stacked as the Florida Panthers, where opportunities are hard to come by, but he has been a real standout player here. But to wrap things up, let's just do a quick fire round here to finish up the episode with the top 15 rookie scorers in the NHL to this point in the season. At number 12, Maverick Bourque of the Dallas Stars with 10 goals and 23 points in 65 games. Then Yuri Kulik of the Buffalo Sabres with 14 goals and 7 assists and 21 points in 53 games. His heavy one-timer is certainly already having an effect on that second power play unit in Buffalo. Emil Heineman of the Montreal Canadiens has only played on the fourth line all season, pretty much no special teams time whatsoever, but he's still been able to score 10 goals and 18 points in 58 games. But last but not least, one of my favorite players from the 2022 NHL draft class, Frank Nazar of the Chicago Blackhawks, who in 45 games after playing some excellent hockey in the American Hockey League, has 7 goals and 17 points in those 45 games this season. And he's just gotten better here down the stretch, especially since the trade deadline, showing increasing amounts of pace and playmaking skill, attacking the middle lane and the low slot. So another player I've loved to watch here this season, and we've been just spoiled among rookies because there's another 10 or so players I could mention here, like Denton Mateychuk and Colin Graff, and even Zachary Lheureux and Fyodor Svechkov. But the episode is only so long. I'm going to have to cut it short here with a relatively loud cat entering my room here at the moment. But thank you so much for tuning in here today. If you're watching on YouTube, please do like, subscribe, leave me a comment down below. What's your thoughts been on the Calder race this season? Who deserves the trophy the most in your eyes? And is Lane Hutson really the favorite here at this point? Because in my eyes, he is. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to catch you listening again very, very shortly.